prophetically, you've spoken a lot about prophecy.
Yeah.
And why don't you mention a few points from the Bible about the prophecy of the land belonging to the Jews and?
Well, it is perfectly clear to me that our present crisis, not only in the Middle East, but the economic and financial crisis and the change in the climate that is so affecting almost every part of the world, is something to do with the covenant that God made with our forefather Abraham, and confirmed it through Isaac and through Jacob, through Isaac not Ishmael, and through Jacob not Esau.
Yes.
And the idea that that's an ancient pact that is dusty, irrelevant, out of date, and not politically correct is incredible, because God always revealed himself as the I am that I am. That he said that was his name. This means that he's not I was that I was, or I will be what I will be, but it means that he is the eternally present one.
You know, the Hebrew speaks volumes. Eheyeh,
Yeah.
Asher, Eheyeh.
Yeah.
It's tremendous.
Yes, exactly that. And I mean, the thing that makes me sort of come to the point where I understand what now is happening in the nations that are coming against Jerusalem is the fact that as far as God is concerned, it was yesterday evening or this morning that he made that pact with Abraham.
Yes.
And it is in perpetuity, whilst there is, he said, a generation of the seed of Abraham through Isaac and through Jacob. Whilst it is present in the world, this pact is operative. Well, so I feel that really half the problem now is we have seen the miracle of the recreation of the State of Israel in 1948.
Yes.
We have seen the reunification of Jerusalem in 1967. And we have seen Israel survive something like 10 wars ever since 47, 48, right the way through to our present time now, and more probably, sadly, to come. But the fact that it was a miracle, that we have passed prophetic milestones, gives us some indication as to where we are in the economy of God, in the purpose of God.
Speaking of miracles,
yes,
some of our soldiers in Sinai in 1967 said they saw a hand from heaven pointing towards the escaping Egyptians. And in 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, on the Golan Heights, you know,
there was another hand.
Not a hand. The Syrian tanks stopped for some reason, and they saw Syrian soldiers jumping out of the tanks and running, pursued by hornets.
It's amazing.
How can you not believe in?
And I feel that the present thing, beginning with the Oslo Accords, is the dismantling of this miracle. It's a satanic strategy to, as it were, demoralize Israel, dismantle Israel, and finally cause her annihilation. And coming back to the PLO, as I see it, the fact is that Fatah believes as much in our annihilation as Hamas.
Yes, of course.
But the difference is that Hamas wants to get rid of us in one big blow, along with Iran and Hezbollah. But Fatah is prepared to wait in this stage-by-stage destruction.
The salami effect.
Yes, exactly
Yes.
that. And I mean, you see, it's interesting that Mahmoud Abbas was the architect of that strategy.
Yes.
So, I mean, what is the difference between Hamas, which has within its constitution our destruction and annihilation, and Fatah, which talks about negotiating with us? But we know what is behind
Oh, yes.
their negotiation.
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, my comfort in all of this, going back to the prophecies, is that God, who recreated Israel, regathered the exiles, and has brought about the rebuilding of the city and the recreation of the fertility of the land, and to a certain extent the restoration of the ecology, the reinstituting of our national institutions, such as police, army, air force, navy, the Knesset above all. It just seems to me that we are facing a huge crisis.
Tell me, Randstad, that's something I don't understand. You speak a lot abroad.
Yes.
In churches.
Yes.
How come that there are so many so-called Christians who don't see all this?
Well, I probably am never asked to speak to those who don't see this. I think that there are many Christians who see Israel and the Jews as a stepping stone to something else. Whereas I rather get thrilled at a little phrase that Malcolm Hedding, the director
Of the Christian Embassy.
Former director of the International Christian Embassy, he said, within Abraham was the DNA of world redemption.
True.
And I think that's an incredible phrase. I think only God could have given it to him. And if you think about that, then it's not that God has finished with the Jewish people. It is rather that he used them to bring the gospel to the ends of the earth, exactly what he said to Abraham at the beginning.
Yes.
Two things, a great nation coming out of your loins, and secondly, in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed.
Yes.
So you have those two things, which we're near to its completion. But as we get near to its completion, God will turn back to the Jewish people and save them.
Yes. And
So,
you have
yes,
you
go
have a begin. You have the beginning already.
Yes,
I mean, what we call the Messianic Jewish movement.
yes.
It's, I don't know. Do you have any idea of how many Messianic Jews there are in the land?
In this land.
In this land.
I can only go by Yad Lachim.
And
They say there were about 16 to 20,000.
well, I think they're wrong. I think there are more.
Yes, well, it may well
I think
be.
there are more. Some are not yet. They're not yet time. It's not yet time for them to come into the open.
Yes,
including amongst the ultra Orthodox.
but you must remember that conference at what was the old Diplomat Hotel. It's years ago now. I can't remember the year. You know, it was a Messianic Jewish Congress. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is that I wondered, where are they all going to come from? They went along, the place was packed. I mean, people came out of moshavim and kibbutzim that had never, ever identified themselves as Messianic Jews.
And by the way, many years ago, Tehila and I were on a speaking tour in Germany.
Yeah.
And I introduced myself to an 80-year-old German as a Messianic Jew from Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He looked at me as though I'd fallen from some other planet. What do you mean, Messianic Jew? Jew, by definition, is Messianic. How do you answer that?
But it's true.
It is.
A real Jew.
Yes.
Yes.
It's important really for Christians
Yes.
to understand more about the land, more about Jews, more about
Yes.
Jews coming to faith also.
Yes, how did you come to know the Lord Jesus as Messiah?
Well, to cut a long story short, really, it's through rereading the Hebrew Scriptures, the Tanakh,
Yeah.
and coming across very familiar passages and seeing them in a different light. It was actually, Tehillah was the Lord's instrument, because when we first met, the only congregation here that she knew was the Narkis Street congregation.
Yes, it was the only congregation other than the Church of Scotland and Christchurch.
Yes. And anyway, so I tagged along, little knowing what I was letting myself in for. And, there always an hour of Bible teaching before the service, and Professor Wes Brown was then teaching from the Old Testament in English. He knew I knew Hebrew, and he kept asking me, is this correctly rendered? Does this passage really say what it says in the original? And this is what the Lord used to get me to start to reread the Hebrew Scriptures, which I had started reading from the age of 5 and left off. And I kept coming across these passages, seeing them, and the passage that really set me on the right path, really prompted me to try and find out what this is all about. In Exodus 33, in verse 11, it says that God spoke to Moses face to face as a man does to his friend. And yet in verse 20, God says, no man can see me and live. This was the paradox which really set me thinking and seeking. And it's a long story, but what about a 6-month walk to Emmaus, if you like, walking through the Scriptures. And in April of 1977, on one Sunday evening in chapel, without even thinking about it, I found myself on my feet, standing up and announcing my conviction that I had no option but to accept Yeshua as Messiah, Savior, and Lord. And I asked for baptism then, but I stipulated the date. The 23rd of May, 1977, was the Feast of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, the origin of Pentecost. And I felt that would be the most appropriate date for my baptism. And I was baptized in the Jordan, in good company, I'm sure. But the baptism also, sometimes some Jews feel as though they're cut off. If they accept Jesus, they're cut off.
Yeah.
Not for me, because it was a mikveh. Nobody dunked me in the water. But it was the Jewish way, and in front of witnesses, and upon proclamation of faith,
in the Lord Jesus.
in the Lord, but in a real Jewish setting.
Yeah.
So there's no cut off from that.
Wonderful.
So we're Jews. We didn't change. I mean, by believing in the teachings of a Jewish rabbi from Nazareth, do we become less Jewish?
Yeah. Not at all. What was wonderful